Thank you. My presentation follows quite neatly on from the second part of Emilia's presentation. I've been asked to skip the parts that everybody knows, so this really will be a very short presentation. I will stick to my 15 minutes. This is part of a bigger project to think about representation, or the category of representation, specifically to think about what are the implications if we take representation as performative or constructivist, as some call it. What are the implications for thinking about contemporary radical politics? But part of this project is then to work my way through authors who have worked with this sort of conception of representation, and one of those authors is, of course, Ernesto Laclau. So I'm going to talk about what Laclau's theory of representation, and then I will link that to how he thinks about the construction of a people, so link it to populism. And I will then use Jan Werner Müller as my foil in order to show that by thinking with Laclau on representation and thinking representation in this way as a performative act, then we can say something about what is at stake in that debate between, on the one hand, someone like Laclau and Mouffe, and on the other hand, the critics, the more or less liberal critics of populism, someone like Müller. So, Müller is probably quite widely known. I mean, his basic problem with populism is that in the case of populism, you have a discourse which imposes unity where there isn't unity. So you have a pluralist society, and then the populist movement or leader or party comes along and imposes a vision, a fiction of the people onto this plurality of society, thereby excluding certain groups. So this is the main problem that Müller and others along those lines have with populism. So that is what I'm going to say something about. Now, for both Müller and for Laclau, populism is inherently linked to representation, specifically to a crisis of representation. So in the case of Müller, in his terms, what happens when we get populism is that the existing parties and the political system is not able to, or is not seen to be representative of the interest of at least some parts of the population. And so you get populist parties coming along and claiming to represent the people, to really represent the people. In the case of Laclau, it's actually quite similar, because when we talk about populism, what we have is a set of demands that are not represented by the establishment of the political system, and so those demands become articulated into a chain of equivalence, the people, and they are no longer just particular demands, they are also demands against the system, and only by getting rid of the system, the establishment, or whatever it's called, of power, only then can we fulfill these particular demands. So it also becomes a crisis of representation of these different demands. Now, what Laclau goes one or two steps further, because he claims that if we think about representation as performative, that is, as not just reflecting an already existing state of affairs, but as actually bringing into being a state of affairs, then this tells us something about not just the construction of the people, but of collective identities more generally. Of course, you think about collective identities on the model of populism, or the construction of the people. And the explanation is this: it's that in the case of the people, you have something that doesn't exist, and therefore it has to be represented. And this is, of course, the edge towards more orthodox Marxism, for which classes really exist, and in the case of the people, it doesn't really exist. And Laclau is saying, he's taking that and saying that, well, actually, this tells us something much more generally about the construction of collective identities, including the people. And then he goes beyond that and argues that this notion of representation tells us something about the political much more broadly. And we can think about that in terms of hegemonic articulation, because what hegemonic articulation does is that it articulates something in a new way. That is, it creates performatively something out of already existing meanings, but something new. So what we have, to get through this as quickly as possible, what we have is that representation is performative in this sense, rather than just reflecting an existing state of affairs. There is no people, and this is the reason why we need representation, and this is why the people can only be representational in this sense of being constituted through, or in Laclau's terms, in the terrain of representation, that is, through claims to represent the people. So populism is a particular kind of discourse. It's a discourse that constructs a people. It's a discourse that claims to represent the people, which it, at the same time is constructing. So there's this double claim at work there. On the one hand, populist discourse claims to represent the people already there, and at the same time, it's this very claim to represent the people that actually constitutes the people that is claimed to be already there. But of course, populism is not just a particular kind of discourse. For Laclau, it's a paradigmatic example of the construction of collective identities. And there's no politics without the construction of collective identities. Okay, so the people is representational. Now, I'd like to address this question of pluralism, because I then want to link it to Jan Werner Müller's critique of populism. And I put pluralist here in quotation marks because I think it's important to stress that when those of us who come from a kind of Laclauian perspective, when we talk about pluralism, we're not talking about pluralism in the same way as someone like Jan Werner Müller is talking about pluralism. So, what does this mean? What does this conception of representation and the construction of the people, populism, what does that mean for pluralism? Well, it means, first of all, that there will always be some element of exclusion, so that's the antagonistic frontier. Something is excluded from the people as being not part of, in fact, not just not part of the people, but as being an enemy of the people in some form, as something which is a threat to the identity of the people and the interests of the people. So there's that exclusion. There's also an exclusion of what Laclau in non-populist reason calls heterogeneity. So these are demands or identities or groups that do not fit within the representational space of the chain of equivalence. So they somehow fall outside of that antagonistic frontier between us and them, between the people and the establishment. They don't quite fit into that. So that is what he calls heterogeneity. And apart from that, there's also a form of marginalization within this chain which makes up the people. So the people for Laclau is the chain of equivalence represented by the empty signifier. Now that space of the chain of equivalence is not an egalitarian space. It's, we could say, it's hierarchical because you have the empty signifier representing the rest of the chain. Or you could also say that another way of thinking about it would be just think about it as constituted as concentric circles around this nodal point of the empty signifier. And this is the case. So you have this kind of marginalization of certain demands or groups or identities or interests that are not represented in the same way or as well as those demands or identities that are closer to this so-called empty signifier, the tendentially empty signifier. So we have these things going on, these kinds of exclusions from the people, and at the same time we should think about the people or the chain or equivalence as striated or hierarchical, if you like, and we have to keep those things in mind. So there's always going to be some exclusion and some power relations here. Now, apart from that, more specifically in terms of pluralism, obviously for Laclau and also for Mouffe, they always stressed how for them the people is always going to be or also it's always going to contain also some difference within. So the usual argument is that we're dealing here with a chain of equivalence, not with identity among the different demands or the different parts of the people. So we always have some difference here, some tension between difference and equivalence. Another way of putting this would be to say that the different parts or the different demands of the people, they are in fact always to some extent floating. In other words, they can be disarticulated from the people and rearticulated in different ways. They never become completely fixed as part of the people, however it's represented. And so another way of putting that point would be to say that the limits, the borders of the people are always fuzzy, because there will always be elements or demands or identities, parts of the people on the edges of it, so to speak, that can fall off the people and be rearticulated in different ways. And this is all because of those tensions between the different parts of the people, this different internal difference, and between the tension between the different parts and the empty signifier, the tendentially empty signifier representing the people. Fine. Now, Müller. So Müller's critique here of populism is, as I said before, that it's anti-pluralist. It imposes a certain image of the people, a fiction of the people, a fiction of the people as homogeneous onto this plurality of society. Müller, he distinguishes between empirical representations of the people and then symbolic representations of the people. And when he's talking about empirical representations of the people, the idea is that you have a civil society, you have this difference, which Emilia also was talking about, and then those differences are represented within the political system, within the liberal democratic institutions, most of all through political parties. But the people, there is a people out there, and this is why he's talking about an empirical people, and that is what we ought to start from. And then the liberal democratic institutions mediate the interests of those of that people, this empirical people, which is obviously a pluralist people. And he opposes that to what he calls symbolic representation, which is, he doesn't refer to Hannah Pitkin, but it's very similar to what Pitkin calls symbolic representation. So these are, this is when he's talking about populism and populist representation of the people. He also talks about fictional representations of the people. And they are precisely fictional, not symbolic, because there isn't a homogeneous people, as according to him, the populists are claiming. There isn't this homogeneous will of the people out there. It's something that is being imposed upon the plurality of society, being imposed by the populist leader of the populist party. And this is why it's both fictional and why populism for him is necessarily a form of manipulation. Now, if we then circle back to Laclau, we can see that, well, there's something going on here which Müller has missed, because he doesn't ask how this so-called empirical people becomes constituted as the empirical people in the first place. And this is precisely what Laclau is talking about when he's talking about the construction of the people, the representation of the people. Because what is hegemony or populist discourse? It is something we need before we can even start talking about these people. So what Müller is missing here is something that comes before that empirical people, and that something is what he calls the symbolic people, this construction of the people. So another way of putting this would be to say that what Müller is missing is what we call the boundary problem, the question of who belongs to the people and who doesn't belong to them. He takes that as a given. And this is what Laclau's approach to representation and the representation of the people, what that can give us. To explain a part of what is at stake in that sort of critique of that sort of I would call it a liberal critique of populism more generally, but including, it's also a critique of Laclau and Wolff's theory of populism on the part of Müller. Now, I have some questions. We'll leave that, and I'll finish here. Thank you.